Jalen Reagor, Christian Watson, John Ross, Will Fuller. Every couple of years, we have one or two wide receivers that steal headlines at the NFL Combine, and most of the time it happens from guys who are running really fast 40 times. And since NFL teams really value speed, their draft stocks rise immediately. In fact, out of the 21 fastest wide receiver 40 times at the NFL Combine or their pro days since 2012, 81% of those players were drafted inside the top 3 rounds of the NFL draft. What might shock you about that is only 5 of those wide receivers out of the 21 ever saw a top 10 season in fantasy football. And the majority of them were actually outright busts. This is a major trap, and like clockwork, it's happening all over again. About a month ago, Matthew Golden was not thought of as a top 3 wide receiver in this class. His production wasn't bad in college, but this guy is not close to a bona fide number 1 wide receiver at Texas or even in the NFL draft. But with one number, that 4.29 that he ran at the Combine, now he's being discussed not only as the first wide receiver potentially off the NFL draft board, but the Dynasty community is also feeding off the hype. So for years, I've been tracking the fastest wide receivers in the NFL draft combine and their pro days and tracking their fantasy careers and how they did with those 40 times that were really, really fast. Particularly 4.35 or faster is the guys that I wanted to isolate for my sample study right here. So you can see the full list on the screen of those guys from 2012 to the 2023 NFL drafts. You've got guys like John Ross, Marquise Goodwin, Henry Ruggs, Anthony Schwartz, KJ Hamler, JJ Nelson, Tyquan Thornton, Tyreek Hill, who all ran sub 4.3 40 times either at the NFL draft or at their pro day. So essentially in total, we've got 21 total guys right here, and there's lots to take away here. So I just want to simplify our major takeaways that we need to take away from this list. So 17 out of the 21 were taken inside the first 3 rounds of the respective NFL drafts. Again, what this should tell you is just how much the NFL teams and their coaches and their scouts and their player evaluators value speed at the NFL level. And this goes across all different positions: wide receiver, running back, quarterback, defensive tackle. Everything matters with speed in the NFL, and that's why 17 out of the 21 were taken inside of the first 3 rounds of the NFL draft. Now, the other thing that what you want to take away here is the 5 highlighted players were the only 5 to have a top 10 fantasy season in a full PPR format. So that's Terry McLaurin that he just did in 2023. T.Y. Hilton did it a couple times. DK Metcalf, Brandon Cooks, and Tyreek Hill obviously had a really, really long stretch. But that's not a big number. Out of all these guys on this list right here, that's really just not that many people. That's only 23.8% of the total field right here. That's just not a very, very significant amount right here. The other thing that I want to highlight with this list right here is Curtis Samuel, Will Fuller, John Brown, Tavon Austin, and DJ Chark. All of them had at least one top 30 season, right? So they were all fantasy relevant is how I would describe those guys at some point in their careers. But 11 out of these 21 were fantasy busts. And you probably don't even recognize a lot of these names. John Ross, probably people recognize his name because he, for years, held the fastest 40 time until Xavier Worthy just took that over in 2024. Marquise Goodwin, probably a lot of people probably have not heard of that name. Anthony Schwartz, KJ Hamler, JJ Nelson, Tyquan Thornton, Andy Isabella, Trey Palmer, Ryan Swope. Like, how many of you guys know all of those names right here? Well, the reason is because they were fantasy busts, even though they were extremely fast players in their respective 40 time. So essentially with this information right here, we need to recognize a couple of things. We as dynasty managers value high round picks in NFL drafts because it ensures a longer leash for that particular player. And I'm not disagreeing with that statement right there. I particularly value wide receivers who are drafted in the first 2 days of the NFL draft because, again, it shows you how long of a leash that they will have. And it also sure looks like NFL teams value speed very, very highly from their wide receivers in particular. So here's where things really get interesting, though. When we compare that list to wide receivers who ran a 4.55 or slower in that same time frame, here's where things get really interesting. Right off the bat, you can see names that you already recognize, not only recognize, These guys were fantasy superstars or are currently fantasy superstars. Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, Puka Nacua, Hunter Renfrow had a top 10 season, believe it or not. Allen Robinson, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp, Jarvis Landry. These guys all ran a 4.55 or slower at the NFL Combine or at their pro day. And again, there's lots to take away here. 14 out of the 23 of those guys were taken in the first 3 rounds of their respective NFL drafts. So not nearly as many of them on a percentage basis were taken inside the first 3 rounds as the wide receivers who were running really, really fast 40 times right here. So again, it further shows just how much NFL teams and their player evaluators value speed coming out of the draft. And the 9 highlighted players, 9, not 5, were the ones that have top 10 fantasy seasons. That's 39.1%. So already what we're seeing here is that slower wide receivers actually have a greater hit rate in fantasy football success, being dominators, than the fast wide receivers do. That might blow some people's minds right there. I don't know. Let me know in the comments below. But also, when we're talking about just fantasy relevant guys, like we did in the first list, Jamison Crowder, Tyler Boyd, Kendall Wright, Kelvin Benjamin, Jacoby Myers, Mohamed Sanu, and Devin Funchess, believe it or not, had at least one top 30 season. Again, in a full PPR scoring format. So what we're seeing here is that these wide receivers who actually ran slower times actually had more success in fantasy football at a higher hit rate, and not only were more fantasy relevant, but they were actually more dominant in fantasy football as well. So again, it should show you just how much NFL teams value speed at the wide receiver position way more than we should be doing as dynasty managers right here. From this 11-year sample size right here, slower wide receivers have just been more fantasy relevant and more fantasy dominant than fast wide receivers. Now, this is not to tell you that you should be targeting slow wide receivers in this NFL draft class right here. I'm not trying to tell you to go out and draft that receiver from Texas Tech who just ran a 4.7. I'm not saying that, because a lot of things come into account when we're talking about these slower guys and why they were able to succeed. But this should tell you what we just went through, that speed means basically nothing for wide receivers in fantasy football. It means basically nothing. So this leads me to the real focus of the video, which is Matthew Golden right here. The new Golden Boy who ran a 4.29 at the NFL Combine. Stole the show, and reports are now that he could be the first wide receiver off the board in this 2025 NFL Draft. Now, if this is true, it shouldn't surprise us based on what we just went through. With all those fast wide receivers going inside the top 3 rounds, it should not surprise us if he is in fact the first wide receiver off the board. But it should not matter to us. It just should not matter. We need to take the speed out of the equation right here really quick and evaluate him fully as a prospect. So let's just take the speed out of the equation, because we have established that speed does not matter when it comes to a dynasty prospect. So over the years, I have developed a remarkably accurate wide receiver prospect model that I have used to find a lot of sleeper guys in the past several years. Jaden Reed, Josh Downs, just to name a couple of those guys. Tank Dell also in that list right there. I've developed a really accurate prospect profile here for these wide receivers that I'm really comfortable with, more than I am with my running back prospect model. So we're going through the 4 critical things right now. So the first thing I'm looking for is the breakout year. What was their breakout year at college? Because this essentially is going to show me how soon this player was able to dominate at the college level. And it also has an indication of how fast they'll be able to get accustomed to the NFL game speed and be able to produce at the NFL level as well. So the earlier, the better with this one. And Matthew Golden was a true freshman breakout. That's an A+ grade. That is a really good start here. I require my breakouts to have at least 500 yards receiving, and he did more than that. So Matthew Golden checks that box right here. Now, his film breakdown grade is the most important part by far. Make no mistake about it. The film breakdown is extremely important here, and the reason I can say this is because over the years, I've developed exactly what I'm looking for on film from these wide receivers. A lot of dynasty YouTubers don't talk about film as much because of the fact that film is very subjective. What I deem as good film, maybe not what you deem as good film. But I've found specific traits that translate to fantasy football, and what I'm discussing are how many layers a player has to their game. Can they go short? Can they go over the middle? Can they run deep routes? Are they crisp with their footwork? Do they have good hands? Do they have a high target share? These are all things that are going into account when I'm looking at a wide receiver in my prospect model with the film breakdown. And Matthew Golden did get a B+. I will say the B+, I would say is a little generous, just a little bit generous, a little bit. Because Matthew Golden, what I majority saw, and what we majority saw watching Matthew Golden, when he was at Texas especially, and keep in mind, he was not at Texas the first 2 years in college. What we majority saw with his time at Texas was a lot of downfield stuff. He was mainly their downfield threat, especially at the beginning of the year. The beginning of the year, he was not a really target-heavy guy. He was getting a lot of those deep balls, taking the top off the defense, and he was actually really good. And this is a plus for me, that he was really good at the goal line. He ran a lot of quick out routes at the goal line. Quinn Ewers would hit him on a quick out route at the goal line, and he would really capitalize on those plays. So that in and of itself did raise his film breakdown grade for me a little bit. But what really got me was at the end of the season, when they started to use him as more as their alpha wide receiver one, we started to see more of those possession receiver routes, such as the wide receiver screens, the wide receiver curls, the wide receiver slants. That's what I'm looking for when I'm trying to determine how good a player can be at the next level. And we didn't see that with him until later in the season, and he looked good doing it. I just didn't see enough of it. That's why he's got a B+ grade right here. So good, not bad at all. Definitely good, but not exactly what I'm looking for when I talk about guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., who had an A+ grade, and Jack Smith-Njigba, who also had an A+ grade as well. The 2024 target share is also a huge thing that I'm looking for with my wide receiver prospects. So obviously every year is different. Essentially what I'm looking for here is the target share that these guys, the year that they had coming out of college. So essentially this is going to determine to me how important you were to this offense. How important you were, that is going to be backed up by numbers right here, is what your target share is. Because this essentially is going to show how dominant of a wide receiver you were in this offense. So this is not a good number right here. A 16% target share is what Matthew Golden had in 2024. That's a C grade for me. That is not what I'm looking for. And again, it kind of coincides with what I was just saying about Matthew Golden in the film breakdown section, which is that Matthew Golden was not he was not a target hog for the first, 8 games basically of his season with Texas. He was not that guy. He did not become their dominant number one until basically they were trying to jockey for seeding in the playoffs. He didn't become that guy until then. I think maybe if he had a full season like he just had at the last 4 games, the last 5 games of his career with Texas, he would have had probably a 20+% target share. But we did not get that from him. And again, that makes me really worry about his potential to dominate at the NFL level. And of course, the last thing that I want to factor in here, like I said, it is important. NFL draft capital. It's very important because that alone shows me how long of a leash they will have as players. You are not going to cut a first rounder unless they do something horrifically wrong within the first 2 years of their rookie contract. So that's TBD, of course. Potential first rounder, obviously that's in question right now. So what people really need to understand and take away is this. Outside of the draft capital section, his 4.29 40 time literally means nothing. Nothing at all. What matters most is his film breakdown, his target share, his breakout year. I like Golden enough. I think Matthew Golden is a good player. But if we're discussing taking him over Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, or even Tet McMillan, the hype needs to be squashed here. So let me know what you think of Matthew Golden. He's become really polarizing in this class already. And if you want to see my top 15 rookie rankings after the NFL Combine, click on this video right here.